Good afternoon and welcome to Keys to Running an Audit-Ready IT Shop, a health system CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Tausight and Censinet. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of healthsystemCIO. I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Aaron Weismann, CISO at Mainline Health, Rob Marti, VP of Solution Engineering and Field CTO with Tausight, and Chris Logan, SVP and Chief Security Officer with Censinet. And then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in, a very important topic today. Aaron, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Yeah, sure. I'm Chief Information Security Officer at Mainline Health. Mainline Health is a hospital system healthcare organization in the Philadelphia suburbs serving the greater Philadelphia region. I run information security. We are audited constantly, both by internal audit, external parties, et cetera, to meet regulatory compliance requirements.
Well, that's perfect for our conversation today, for sure. Rob?
Hi, all. Yeah, Rob Marti. I am the field CTO for Tausight. Tausight is a data security company focused on healthcare privacy and sensitive data in healthcare, right? So our total focus is finding EPHI, unstructured file systems that may be scattered around your organization, inventorying those, and then integrating with your broader controls ecosystem to start to get control of that data that's floating around out there, that shadow PHI.
Very good, Rob. Thank you. Chris?
Great. Thanks for having me. Chris Logan, Senior Vice President, Chief Security Officer here at Censinet. So Censinet is a platform. We created a platform called RiskOps. It's a cloud-based risk network that enables the seamless and secure collaboration between healthcare delivery organizations and third-party vendors so that you can assess, monitor, mitigate the cyber risks that threaten patient safety. We also allow organizations, healthcare delivery organizations and such, to understand their enterprise risk posture by basically assessing themselves against common frameworks and standards like the NIST CSF, the health industry cybersecurity practices, HIPAA privacy, HIPAA security, and so forth. So collaborative risk exchange that allows organizations to truly manage their risk in one central location. Thanks for having me.
All right, good. Very good. Thank you. Aaron, we're going to start with you. You said you're constantly audited. How would you describe the state of oversight around health system IT security? What entities might demand to review your processes, policies, and past performance? So who's going to send you a letter or however it works? And how might that process start, such as the letter I mentioned, and what might they be looking for?
Yeah, so the state of oversight around IT security in health is distributed, if I'm being generous. We have CMS obviously enforcing HIPAA privacy and security rules. There's the Food and Drug Administration looking at how we use biomedical devices and also looking at the biomedical devices themselves. CISA, the new relatively new cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency that also handles security oversight for critical infrastructure. And then we also have Joint Commission that licenses our hospitals, comes on site, makes sure we're doing what we need to do. Previously, they haven't asked cybersecurity questions, but obviously, given the volume of healthcare attacks in recent years, they've been asking, right? And they want to see that we have documentation in place, we're following requirements, et cetera. So the entities that demand to review our policies and processes really, even sort of further afield of that. So CMS is going to ask us for our documentation, policies, et cetera, in the event that we have a reportable healthcare breach. EPHI being exfiltrated, et cetera. And, annually we have to go through a HIPAA security risk assessment where we bring in a third-party vendor to look at our materials, see that we're performing, up to snuff with HIPAA, et cetera. You know, and again, as I said, Joint Commission's also going to ask for that. We might even have third parties asking for that. So if we partner with other organizations to share data, or, you know, as a health payer in some cases, et cetera, or health insurer, excuse me, you know, we might be asked there for, because we'll be a downstream third party for materials there. So a lot of different ways that's going to start, and a lot of different things they're going to look for. High level, I think they're going to look at policies and processes. They're going to want to make sure that we have our security requirements in place, that we've at least met a baseline, that we're checking all the boxes for HIPAA, et cetera. Yeah, high level overview, I think.
What about OCR, Aaron?
Yeah, so you know, OCR is part of CMS, and they're the ones who, if we have a reportable healthcare breach, 500 records are over, you know, are really going to come in and say, hey, you know, what's going on? Why weren't you able to safeguard this information, et cetera? It's a very retrospective analysis, but, you know, a very valuable one to ensure that, you know, whatever happened, if it's a cybersecurity event, you know, that you're at least doing the due diligence that you need to do. And it was one of those things that unfortunately you just couldn't control. You know, what we've seen is for security organizations that don't have that in place, there are lawsuits, obviously, enhanced fines, et cetera, and it becomes a very costly proposition to defend against those issues.
Very good. Rob, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really interested. Aaron, are you seeing an uptick in financial auditors asking cyber-related for cyber-related materials for certifications, or actually performing those audits as well?
From a financial standpoint, that's interesting. So, you know, we undergo a financial audit because we're a nonprofit organization every year. Those questions have pretty much stayed the same. They do a pretty thorough job. We've actually seen an uptick in questions coming from our cyber insurance company, obviously, because, you know, everybody's being attacked now, right? So it's becoming a very costly proposition to insure. And then our electronic health record provider, Epic, or electronic medical record provider, excuse me, whatever you want to call the system, they're asking for enhanced information, you know, both to satisfy their financial reporting requirements because they're a publicly traded company, and also just to make sure that we're doing what we need to downstream of them to safeguard their infrastructure.
Awesome. I'm curious too, how about the uptick in patient class action lawsuits related to cyber? Are these things that the board are starting to consider as an additional liability related to cyber practice?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that, you know, our legal fund necessarily incorporates that yet. I know some other organizations probably are, you know, but the board is absolutely asking questions about, you know, what's going to happen in the event of a ransomware attack? What is that class action lawsuit going to look like? And then as we implement new technologies, you know, there are class action lawsuits for metapixel trackers, for example, right? And, you know, Google trackers, et cetera. So are these new technologies, which are ultimately helpful for the organization, ultimately helpful for the patient, also going to result in potential liability?
That's amazing. Yeah, I think one other aspect, just in terms of regulators that we deal with in the pharmacy world here in Oklahoma, is related to the FDA and their inspections, as well as the FTC and their breach notification provisions that are seeming to get more traction lately. So these are areas that we're also focusing and placing attention on, just in terms of the overall regulatory environment.
So, Rob, that's one Aaron didn't mention, I don't believe, the FTC. So that's another one. Tell me a little bit more about that, what they're looking at.
Yeah, so they've got a breach notification provision as well, and they are actively enforcing their provisions. And I think there is some movement to start to consolidate some of the enforcement related to these agencies. But today, I think the FTC is stepping up their action really because the CMS seems to be a little bit in the background on some of the breach notification provisions, et cetera. And not a lot different from you know, the publicly traded companies. His ideas of everyone being timely with their notifications, thorough, and I think the world has had enough, at least in the U.S., of kind of these long notification provisions. I got breached a year ago. I told CMS 30 days ago. I think overall the pressure is on to know what's happening in your environment, to quickly notify investors, regulators, and really to drive accountability for organizations with regard to their security posture.
Chris, thoughts?
So I'm just going to put an exclamation point on something real fast. There's no shortage of oversight. It's coming from every single angle. I think the biggest problem that I witnessed, that I've observed, is that no two agencies are asking the same thing. So we're struggling as organizations to keep up with all the oversight, because we're being asked the same question 4 different ways, but have to provide 4 different responses to that same question. So there's really a lack of commonality with the organizations that are providing oversight. And when the oversight really ramps up, it's when organizations have something horrible happen to them. And the last thing you want to deal with is some regulator coming in when you're trying to fix a problem. This is an area that I don't want to say I'm passionate about, but it kind of pisses me off in a little bit, because if you cared that much about what was going on, why didn't you come in before we had the problem? Why didn't we solve the problem before it was a problem, right? So we're very reactive in this space, and you're seeing it start to ramp up in different agencies in different places across the US, especially with healthcare delivery organizations. I've spoken to a few folks that had breaches. I'm not even worried about the class action lawsuits that are coming their way. I'm worried about the other states now that are leaning in and asking questions, because you may have patient data across a wide vast of geographical space, right? So now you have states now burdening you as well on top of everybody else. So it's becoming an overburden, and how we solve that problem is we really got to get these folks on the same page. Don't ask me 17 questions about authentication. I should be able to tell you exactly what I'm doing in that space, and that should satisfy that need, because I'm the one running the program, right? I have my team set that program up, so I can give you that best information. I see a lot of gotchas in the space, and it kind of drives me a little bit crazy. And then let's take this the other side of the coin, because yes, I was a healthcare CISO for many years. Now I'm on the other side of the desk. You know who else I have oversight problems with? Every single customer that we go to. So every single customer is now asking me questions about my security programs, what I'm doing to protect their information. And they're never asking that question the same way. So now I'm being bombarded, not just by the regulatory agencies that I have to give information to. I'm being bombarded by our prospects and customers about, hey, are you doing something a certain way, and does it meet their measure? Well, if I'm meeting the measure that's been laid out according to a cybersecurity framework, isn't that good enough? When was that not good enough for me? So it's really this weird balancing act right now. And definitely a question that we need to continue to double click on, and really start to get some ability to start to share information more seamlessly and concurrently that satisfies all parties involved.
Very good. Aaron, a couple of things I'd like to dig into a little more. One would be the idea of, and you had mentioned that you hire third parties sometimes to do auditing, right? So you're prepared for when an external entity comes in and wants to audit. So you've got that sort of 2 buckets. You've got the audits that we do ourselves to make sure we're in good shape, and then the audits someone from outside wants to come in and do. And then from the, I'm seeing that the external audits might be into 2 buckets, and tell me if I'm wrong here. One would be no incident involved, sort of a, hey, we're coming in to check up and we want to see what you have going on. And then one would be post-incident, meaning you've had an incident and now we have questions to ask.
Right.
Is that in actuality how it goes? There are entities that come in before just to take a look, and those that only come in when there's an incident. And then you have also the audits you do and the audits that are done to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, I don't talk to CMS on a regular basis. Knock on wood, I'm not going to be talking to them anytime soon. The only time I'm really talking to them from a security standpoint is after something terrible's happened, right? And to Chris's point, absolutely don't want them here while I'm trying to also recover and fix whatever's going on and make assurances, et cetera, right? It overcomplicates the issue. But a lot of what we do proactively is to make sure that, our technology infrastructure is up to snuff, to safeguard us from attack, right? So, we have internal penetration tests, external penetration tests. We do look to those administrative audits to make sure staff actually know what to do in the event of an attack, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of work that goes into making sure external entities don't need to come in on a regular basis. But, we do, like Joint Commission, for example, just randomly audits us every 3 years. So, we have to be prepared for those kinds of audits as well.
Chris, any thoughts on that? My buckets?
No, I think your buckets are accurate. It's interesting. I love the idea of people audit when they're intrigued or looking. I think about cyber insurance because those audits they can be quite hairy and they're never the same. They're always different regardless of who you go to or what year you go through. And again, it's going to be multiple agencies. And again, from the looking at it from the other side, the outside looking in, it's those audits that I'm conducting to make sure that we're doing all the right things above board within my organization. Is that good enough for everybody else to take on? Is that just good enough at this point in time that you'll accept those findings of the program that I've built and I've worked these controls around? So I think it doesn't matter if they were showing up today, tomorrow, unannounced, announced. We just have this divide about what's good enough these days to be audit ready and audit capable. We're doing our best. I mean, we're running at 1,000 miles an hour. We're running with limited resources, limited funding, just like everybody else. So we're really starting to look at what's the biggest risk, what's the biggest impact to our business, and that's going to be different across every organization. How do you start to demonstrate that in a way to this organization that wants to audit your books to say, hey, that's good enough. I understand. If I know what my risks are and I'm addressing those risks, that should be good enough at that point in time. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit further. It's like the compliance bingo BS card. Like I have to have all these items marked off the box because somebody said so. Well, it may not add value to my organization. It may not even be a risk to my organization because I have other controls in place that satisfy that need. So having to be able to answer 7 different masters in that regard, it creates this confusion across those buckets that you've already laid out.
Hey, Chris, you could, from what you're saying, you could have a risk that's only a risk in the sense of an audit, right? It's not a real risk, but it's going to be part of this audit. So it's a risk in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's technology risk out there that auditors are still looking for. I give you, just off the top of my head, seamless kind of foolish examples, right? Most of us have taken the stance that if we're providing services and they're cloud-based services, we're going to be using multi-factor authentication, right? So 2 factors to authenticate. Why are you still asking me about password controls? Nobody cares about password controls anymore because I have 2 factors that I need to use to authenticate. It doesn't matter if it's a 1-character password or 45-character password. I still need a device with an authenticator app on it to get into that application. It's mind-numbing to me to have to answer that question. And it constantly comes up. Are you compliant with our password controls? No, because I don't need them because I use 17 factors of authentication and a biometric measure and my firstborn child's blood at this point. I mean,
Right.
It's amazing to me how we haven't grown in this regard to keep up with the technology controls, and we're still asking compliance questions that just don't matter.
But Rob, sometimes we have to deal with the bureaucracy as it is, right? We can rage against it, but the like almost the definition of bureaucracy is that common sense doesn't matter. And if you bang up against bureaucracy, you're going to lose. Better to just comply. Anyway, your thoughts on anything that we're saying here, Rob?
No, completely agree. I mean, just to expand a little bit on the password side of the house, just because it's such a great example. And this came out 3 years ago, I think, maybe longer, and said, hey, you don't need to expire passwords anymore, right? Unless you've had a compromise. Yet we still run these cycles of 30, 60, 90-day password resets. We interrupt patient care. We create a bad Monday for clinicians because their password expired because we haven't yet figured out, 1, how to adopt it, and 2, how to satisfy the regulator in it. So instead, we burden the very people that we are trying desperately to free up to make to move the technology and all of these controls mindsets and everything related to this into the background, and just allow us to take care of people, right? Allow our clinicians more time at the bedside and we're still not there. We're not accomplishing those goals because a lot because of this mixed regulatory state. But on top of it, it's just the cycle of learning, right? NIST makes a recommendation that we should change this. We've got to enculturate that all the way down to into the provider space. We have to get comfortable with it, and understand the true nature of what NIST is telling us, what that standard, what the change in that standard means, and how do we actually protect our organization managing to quantitative or qualitative risk measures.
So we can have a delay or a disconnect between the best practices as identified by respected entities such as NIST, so they can change what they are telling you to do, but that may not have gotten over to a regulatory agency that's doing an audit. Is that correct? So you may have a disconnect there.
Right. You may have a control requirement that hasn't incorporated the new guidance. You may also, so you've got that on the regulatory side. You also have it in the practitioner side. What tools do I have to consume this new guidance? What is the impact of that guidance on me, and how do I actually bring that guidance to bear in my organization?
Aaron, love to bring you in here and get your thoughts about this dynamic of things perhaps changing from a best practice point of view, but not quite changing with the auditors yet. You're left in a position of either having to adopt the best practice and then have to defend your adoption of it to the entity that's looking for compliance, or continue to perhaps inconvenience your users unnecessarily, from what I'm hearing here.
Yeah, no, I think we're actually being pulled in three directions, and Rob's observations and Chris's about passwords, especially are a great example of this, right? We have sort of these oversight organizations that are coming out with these new best practices that we have to figure out some way of implementing in our organization, whether or not it works. We then have auditors who have certain expectations, and then we have providers who frankly are logging in to different PCs 60, 70, 80 times a day. And that is a serious disruption to their work, right? They're literally spending hours of their day typing in passwords, for example. I think any changes we make, we're not going to satisfy the auditors. We're not going to meet best practice, and we're going to piss off our clinicians, right? Like, our clinicians don't want passwords at all. So, really trying to figure out the balance of all three of those. How are we compliant, and how do we make sure that we're meeting the needs of our customers, right? Who in this case are our users, the clinicians who, log in multiple times a day. And then how do we also try and drive that best practice adoption? It's sort of maddening, right? Because you're never satisfying anybody, and you have to drive good security despite that.
Yeah, it's go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say to that point of logging in, that these providers log in so frequently that I actually had a provider here, a very senior provider here in Oklahoma, calculate the number of times in a day he logged in, the number of hours in a month that cost, and sent me a $50,000 bill and said, "Make this better." Right, and it truly has an impact on patient care, right? If you look at those hours away from the bedside, not providing care, we already have a shortage of providers, and frankly, that was a great motivator for me and my teams to go find ways to shorten that impact and handle that imposition of having to log in each time you change locations in the health system to provide care, whether that's during rounding or just through the typical daily aspects of these clinicians and the way they practice.
And Aaron, that's probably a tough sell when you're talking to your users, right? It's not even a best practice per se. The best practice has changed. Your lives should be easier, but I can't do it because we're going to be audited and they still haven't changed. That's a tough sell to your users, right?
Yeah, and around the password space specifically, we had a lot of conversations about how do we come to a compromise about this, right? You can't tape passwords to walls, right? You can't tape them to PCs. You can't use very simple passwords. How are we going to get you clinicians to the point where, you're acting securely and you don't have this level of disruption, right? And that's where new technology comes in, right? We change how we log into PCs, how we interact with PCs. In our situation, it's tokenized authentication. And that hasn't made every provider happy, but it's made a lot of providers happy, and it's streamlined their workflow. So, we try and leverage in our security office solutions that are going to improve the lives of our users as much as possible. So as we're evaluating technology, we really do think about that endpoint clinical impact and what that's going to look like.
Very good. All right. Next question. What are some characteristics of an IT program that would have little reason for anxiety if it received a letter of impending oversight? What are the trickiest areas around compliance? And are there some areas where there is sort of a disconnect between what's actually happening on the ground and what's expected, which I guess can be quite difficult? And then let's talk a little specifically about the third-party risk and EPHI when it comes to potential auditors. What would they be looking for in this area? Chris, let's start with you.
Oh, I knew you were going to come to me.
You're damn right.
That's all right. So the characteristics of a security program that has little reason for anxiety, one that's not plugged in. No internet connectivity, no third parties, just standalone PCs with nothing going on. I kid, but I don't kid at the same time. I think the characteristics of the security program that if I take a step back and I look at mine, the things that I don't have anxiety about is the things that I really control, right? So the parts of the program that I've built, my team runs, we've got management approval to conduct those types of activities, right? It's in lockstep with what the business needs. Where I get anxious is when now I have to rely on others to perform some duty, some service, some function. And that could even be within my own organization, right? Because now there has to be a specific level of oversight from me on that side of the organization to ensure they're doing what they say they're going to do. So it's very tough to balance these two pieces of the puzzle, because if you think about the nature of what a security program is today, as opposed to what it was 20 years ago, it is hyper connected. It's truly a differentiator for your organization because it touches and impacts every aspect of the business. Because we're so digital now, because we're so consumer facing, all these pieces have to be in play for everything to move and run as successfully as we want it to be. So, the things that I manage, I'm extremely comfortable with. I have no problem standing by the stuff that I own. I put a flag in the ground and we've done it. We've accomplished, we've landed on the moon. I think about everything else. I get a little bit of anxiety because now I need to have a program that's managing those folks, managing that process, testing that process to ensure it's doing the function that it's supposed to do. So that continuous monitoring aspect, and then take it beyond the four walls of the organization. Now think about the reliance, and I know it's a bullet down here. Think about the reliance that we have as healthcare delivery organizations, and even those that are delivering services to healthcare delivery organizations. I now have to build a product or a service or run a program that is having direct reliance on somebody beyond my organization. That's how complex care delivery has become, right? Or that's how, integrated it's become. It's become much more of a consumer sport at this point. So now I have to trust that those folks are doing what they say they do. And I have some oversight into that process, but it still keeps me up at night because are they truly doing what they say they do? And I'll leave it at this. Like, I believe that everybody's putting their best foot forward, right? I firmly believe that. I don't think there's anybody out there that's like, nah, screw it. I'm just not going to do my best today to solve the problem. What not good for bottom line revenues, definitely not good for patient care. Those two things matter, right? Regardless of whether you're an HDO or outside an HDO providing services. The reliance on the fourth and fifth parties now has become such a big point of concern and topic. And I'll give you a great example, Move IT. I'm not going to say any more about it, right? Did we know that somebody that we were relying on were using vulnerable software processes to provide that service to us, which is so critical to our business function? Probably not, right? Were we not asking the right questions? How do we get to a point where the ecosystem is running in the same direction to where I can have that level of confidence? Can I solve that problem today? I think I can. I think it's going to take a little bit more work to get everybody on board, though. So I'm going to pause there because
it's good
I'll
stuff.
take all the oxygen out of this Zoom if you let me.
Good, no, good stuff. And I'm gonna ask a follow-up, but I'm gonna put it to Aaron, but it's on what you said, Chris. So I'm gonna do that little sleight of hand. Um, you talked about confidence in what's under your control and concerns about what aren't. So, Aaron, one of the things we're seeing, and this relates to sort of cyber talent shortage and all this, you've got different areas here. You've got sort of the traditional third parties, different technologies that people are using. Then you've got sort of the idea of healthcare IT, health system, especially security shops like yours, Aaron, leveraging out managed services is the term now, managed services, because maybe it's hard to get that person, it's hard to get that talent in house, or I can't pay them enough, or I train them up and they go. So and maybe I want 24/7 capabilities around some of this stuff. So I go with a firm that's global and they always have eyes on this or whatever. Um, but that's out of your control to a certain degree, right? So we've got cloud stuff, that everyone's putting, these are a little bit out of, so I wonder what your thoughts around that, these kind of dynamics and the risk that they imply.
Yeah, I mean, it's potentially a significant risk, right? But I don't think it's any more risk than, having someone on staff who's going to do something nefarious, or, someone who inadvertently does something bad, right? And the way we address that is visibility. So it's building visibility so you can build trust with those third parties. And, we do the, third party risk assessments, we do architectural reviews, we do, check-ins, at least with some of our managed service providers, et cetera. Try and validate the services that they're providing and the quality of services they're providing, and it's really just trying to develop this trust framework all around with our managed service providers where, we sort of say, okay, we think you're doing a good job because of X, Y, and Z. Do we 100% know? No, and we never will, but we're mitigating the risk to the degree we can. Unfortunately, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to build up probably an unreasonable level of program there. I think where there's a downstream breach, third, fourth, fifth layer of provider, again, there's a lot of hindsight review of, well, did you actually vet this person or group appropriately? Should you have done more, et cetera? And there's no right way to answer that question, right? Because you made the decisions that you made. Hindsight is always 20/20, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to probably miss something in the moment.
Rob, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the antithesis of security is complexity, and our health systems are complex by their very nature. They're big. They've got a lot of people, and all of our security plans are perfect until tested, right? And truly, and I agree. The things where we have visibility, however far that visibility extends, where we can have actual ground truth, are the places that we have I would say less anxiety. And those around supply chain, those are, the idea of a software bill of materials is kind of an interesting and sexy idea to a CISO until you figure out that managing that is a whole discipline in and of itself, right? What am I going to do with all that information? Now, am I accountable for that? And for following up on that as well, I think so supply chain, obviously business associates have come into the limelight for as major components related to breach and the impact of their environments. So how do we effectively get control or visibility into those organizations? How can we extend some level of trust? And I think it all boils back down to knowing what you can't secure, what you don't know you have, right? So the inventory of that data, knowing that there was volumes of EPHI sitting on a MoveIt server. How do you expose that, and how do you, in a way that allows the leadership team to then make plans and start to manage the actual risk that's out there, sans the regulatory pressure and the compliance checklist. Let's get to the point where these vulnerabilities actually run the risk of creating a negative patient outcome or a material impact to our business, or a material impact to our patients, clinicians, employees, et cetera. And let's focus where it matters.
I want to talk, it seems like a good time to talk about application rationalization. When you talk about the enemy of uh, good security is complexity, I've certainly, that makes sense. And I've heard that sentiment before. I think one of the main areas we see CIOs and CISOs working to do that is application rationalization. We don't need six of something that does largely the same thing. They're actually pushing those programs and working with the operational folks to try and get that number down. Rob, do you see that as a really sweet spot or some low-hanging fruit to reduce that complexity?
I think it's a positive step. I will say that I rarely see that being driven as a security initiative, though. Security benefits from it, but typically it's operational complexity and patient care creates challenges that have zero to do with cyber risk, right? Patient risk and just overall operational efficiency. So I've typically seen app rationalization happening for similar reasons, just in a different part of the organization, and or the financial squeezes on healthcare. Frankly, so there's a number of reasons why people are taking that approach. App rationalization can definitely help security, but it all depends on who you partner with, right? And so that gives us fewer business associates and fewer technologies to continually evaluate for the risks that they introduce in the organization, right? Every time we patch a system or upgrade a system, we run the risk, we introduce net new capability. We also potentially expand the attack surface and the amount of vulnerable PHI, whether structured or unstructured, that can leak, that we're now accountable for, right? And that we now need to expose and build business processes around. So absolutely think it's a positive step for security. Rarely do I see it being driven by information security, but I do see my peers jumping on those projects and really helping to drive towards those, because it definitely enhances our ability to secure the environment.
Chris, do you think CISOs and health systems could or should be voices for moving towards application rationalization and extolling the benefits of doing this, where they can get the operational folks on board, rather than just being passive and perhaps saying, well, if they do it, great, I'm a beneficiary. No, perhaps I should be trying to drive this.
Yeah, I'll say some unpopular stuff. I do this from time to time, right? And I'm gonna reflect on my experience going through this process. When we were going through app rationalization, it wasn't for operational benefit. It was to lower cost. I mean, just the premise of doing this exercise to take cost out of the organization brought a whole slew of additional risks with it that the business wasn't thinking about, right? You brought on an application for a very specific reason. Somebody brought it in because it improved an operational output. It could have improved patient care. How do you ensure like for like as you take one of those pieces away and roll it into something bigger? Instead of looking at it from the lens of, well, we got to cut budget. So we got 7 of these things that do the same thing, cut 6 of them. As a security practitioner, I get very nervous about that use of that tool for that regard, right? So instead of looking at it from what are the operational output and what is the benefit, don't look at it solely from the lens of revenue, right? So how do we save money? I think the CISO has to have a seat at that table, right? Because again, another area when we start to rationalize those applications is that we could have the best application in the world that covers all of the bases that we need to solve the operational capability and reduce the cost. It can be written on code that's not up to par for what we expect from a security perspective, right? So we're now taking on additional risk, potential breach, potential other liability for what savings at the end of the day. Is it an enhancement to patient safety? Is it a benefit to the revenue? Is it an improvement of patient care and operational aspects? Does it reduce our threat landscape? Those are all questions that have to be combined as you go through this process. It can't just be one-sided. So the CISO having a seat at the table for that discussion, imperative. imperative to be a part of that organization. And hopefully it's just a part of the fabric of that organization. I'm seeing a lot of organizations get more culturally sound in this space, asking a lot more questions at like the board of director level. So normally you would have been relegated as a CISO to the audit compliance committee once a year to go give 2 slides because they just don't want to hear from you. Now you're doing it on a quarterly basis to the board of directors. It still may only be 2 slides, but they're listening because they know what the implications are to the brand, to patient safety and care delivery now, if something goes wrong in this oversight of what the CISO has. App rationalization is one piece of that bigger puzzle.
Aaron, I'd love to hear your thoughts about application rationalization, the benefits, and what do you think the CISO's role should be in that process?
Yeah, no, and I agree with Rob and Chris's observations, right? App rationalization certainly is a benefit to the organization. It's a benefit to security. To Chris's point, you can't just be financially motivated with it. You really, really, really have to have a seat at the table and be able to articulate what the threat landscape minimization is. You also have to be able to articulate the potential impacts to security posture, right? So we talk about the threat landscape, but, we also have concerns, I guess, about, misuse of the application, right? Which is a threat in itself. But I think a lot of folks forget internal threats. We're so focused on, hey, let's prevent the next ransomware attack, the next exfiltration of data, that we don't necessarily think about people snooping in patient records, right? And the systems behind those take a long time to train. So app rationalization has potential impacts for those. It potentially makes it more difficult in some spaces for at least a period of time to say, okay, we're going to be able to detect threats internal to our environment that we might not always be thinking about. And it's important to be able to convey that as well. So, I think having a well-rounded view of sort of what's going on, what the impacts of app rationalization are, and being able to have that conversation, even if, the CEO or CFO say, no, we're going to do this because of X, Y, and Z reasons, and those reasons are money, great, right? I mean, at least they know the risk and they understand what they're getting into from the risk standpoint.
Very good. Aaron, I'm going to stick with you on this one. Let's talk about the differences between compliance and being able to demonstrate compliance, which is an interesting difference. And then there's a difference between being able to demonstrate compliance with difficulty or ease. And the idea being that if you're being audited and perhaps things are messier than they should be, you're doing everything right, but maybe your documentation isn't in order. So you've got to have people running around and trying to get all this information together. And you mentioned it could be a whole number of different entities that want it. They may want it in different ways. And that may take you, I've heard the expression, take your eye off the ball when it comes to security. That may take your team's eye off the ball. So obviously, the best case scenario is they come in, you're clean, everything's there, documentable, you slide it over and you keep doing what you were doing before. But I'm sure many entities are very far from that. So just take me through those dynamics a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there is a difference, and you hit the nail on the head between being in compliance and being able to demonstrate compliance, right? You could be doing everything right, but you could not have it documented. I'd almost argue that those kinds of hygiene type things are telling for a security and an IT organization, though, right? If you don't have good hygiene, if you're not, the security equivalent of brushing your teeth every day, then you're going to have cavities, right? You're going to have heart problems. You're going to have all of these unforeseen issues that result from not being able to address the underlying thing, which is good hygiene, right? So, ultimately, a security organization that documents well, it takes a lot of work. It's very difficult. It goes a very long way, not only to demonstrate that you're acting in a secure way, but that you're doing so competently and that your place in the organization is being handled competently, right? So I think, being able to demonstrate compliance with ease is, hey, not only do we do the thing we say we do, but we document it, right? It's auditable, it's repeatable, we're able to communicate it to folks, et cetera. It becomes a lot more difficult to do that when you don't have the documentation in place. And, ultimately, when you're in an audit, you have to pull all that documentation together de novo if you don't have it organized already, right? So it becomes a lot more complex. It becomes a lot more of a headache, in my opinion. Having it documented, having it stored in a specific place becomes a lot easier, right? Overall, and saves a ton of time overall. And then I think, I don't know that organizations are necessarily in a vulnerable position, if they're only able to demonstrate compliance with difficulty, right? Certainly they're not in a repeatable place, right? Because like, what are you repeating to? Everything you do is probably going to be a little different because it's all anecdotal. But I think when you have that auditable and repeatable process, then you're able to confidently say, okay, here's what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, where are we not doing things that we ought to be doing? And then you're able to supplement that, or at least have a conversation about, hey, how do we supplement this? How do we mitigate it? Or do we just accept these risks?
Very good. Rob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. If you can't demonstrate compliance, you're not compliant. Bottom line. It's like having a sales team and not having any sellers, or just having an SDR and you're trying to break into enterprise and you don't have anybody who understands how to sell the enterprise. It is to me, you can't have one without the other. Now that said, while compliance is a focus from a security perspective, compliance doth not equal security, right? So we need to satisfy regulators, but it shouldn't be our sole focus. We're more interested in those things that are highly likely, that present a risk to the organization. That being compliant isn't necessarily going to have any with a set of requirements isn't going to have any impact on, right? And so just really important to know the difference between what you get from a compliance perspective and what master you're serving versus what you're doing when you're building a holistic security program.
Very good, Chris.
So again, I'll say something that's probably not going to be taken well. But what's the minimum level of compliance that I'm documenting and proving to you that's good enough? And what do I mean when I say that is that, in some compliance, some security standards, they'll set a baseline minimum, right? And I'll conform to that baseline minimum. But as the auditor or somebody else comes in who then wants me to demonstrate my compliance, I'm showing you compliance with that baseline minimum. And they may say it's not good enough for me. Well, it's good enough for what I'm trying to accomplish here by the letter of the law. How is that not good enough for you? And I give you a perfect example. So those of us that develop software, I follow SDLC guidelines, right? I put all the right tools, controlling and training around it. Now I'm being asked additional questions about this process that are asking me to implement additional controls that are well beyond the scope of potential risk for my organization as what we're building. When is it just not good enough anymore, right? So I'm doing everything by the letter of the law that I'm supposed to based upon these mandates. You have to be able to take that, auditor, as the de facto standard that, hey, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, this is a double-edged sword, right? Because you could always, like the organization leads, well, we're following HIPAA security. Well, who gives a shit? Because it's not good. It's just not good, right? It was written for a very specific point in time. It has yet to evolve. You should have evolved from that. So this is a balancing act at the same time. I should be keeping up with what the industry is demanding, but I shouldn't be demanded upon of what something that's far beyond what the industry should be at the same time. So it's a little food for thought when we get to this point. Now, I'm going to go back to something that Aaron said here, is that you should have it all documented. If you don't have that written security program, if you don't have the policies and procedures behind the actions that you're doing, you don't do them. That's basically what it boils down to. If you can't prove on paper that we say we do something a very specific way and then show how it's done, why are you even bothering at this point in time, right? You have to have that level of documentation, centrally stored, managed, processed, updated, and readily available for those that are coming in to ask those questions. That's going to be the key takeaway.
So maybe my vision was kind of silly, which is someone there with a messy office and papers everywhere, and the auditor comes in. They go, "Well, I have that somewhere. Give me a minute," and they're reaching, difficult to show compliance.
The difference now is that it's not a messy desk; it's a messy Google Drive or a Microsoft SharePoint site or something else.
Oh,
right?
that's in here somewhere.
We've taken it and we've just digitized it, which has
Right.
kind of made it worse. At least I knew that policy was underneath my coffee cup.
Right. Right. Okay. So we think that's probably a rarity out there where someone is really good and in compliance, but difficult time proving it. That's probably not a common entity.
Survey says yes.
Okay. All right. All right. I have an external question from our good friend, industry legend, Bill Spooner. And it goes into kind of what we're saying, Chris, what you were saying about sort of perhaps being asked to attest to things that are outside the scope of what you were told you had to do. Of the external entities with cybersecurity oversight roles, which agencies, in your view, truly add value? And we're ready for the jokes here, versus those whose role seems to just to be to beat on you. Aaron, I'm gonna have to go to you first on
Perfect. Thank God.
that.
Yeah. So I came from government before, I was here at Mainline Health, worked for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, both as an attorney and in their security group. So, take my answer with a grain of salt, which is, I don't think any government organizations exist simply to beat on you, right? I think government organizations exist to help, and they do so in their own misguided ways for their own misguided desires, right? And, I think a perfect example of that is when the Department of the Treasury came out and said, hey, anybody who pays a ransom to an organization that might be a terrorist organization, you have this parade of horribles that you might face. And that happened in a vacuum. Nobody, I think, was really prepared for that, at least outside of certain circles. And it's like, okay, well, why would you do that, right? Like, why are you making my job as a CISO more complex when I'm in probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my organization? And now you've just thrown a wrench in how I handle that situation, and I'm totally unprepared for it. But I think they did so for good reason, right? Obviously, we don't want to support terrorism. We don't want to fund, physical crime, sex trafficking, what have you. And that's what's happening with all these ransomware payments, right? So, I think the lack of coordination, is really a problem there. But I do think it comes from a good place all around. I don't think anybody's just sitting there going, man, I really want to make this person's day bad, right? At least I hope not.
Rob, I believe it was President Reagan who said the worst thing you'll ever hear is someone says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Yeah, I have an experience with one such agency, and I'm not going to make life more difficult for myself, but I will say, regulators legislating while they're on site is a problem, and there's not a lot of recourse, regardless of your documentation you have as a small or large business to deal with that, right? Ultimately, it becomes less expensive to comply, even if the demand is not a legal order or actual law, right? Because you can get tripped up with, the government has hundreds of people to my one that can get on the call and beat me for hours into compliance, and they enjoy doing it. And so that again, that's been my experience. I think ultimately I do completely agree with Aaron. I don't think it's out of malice. Sometimes I think it's out of ignorance. Other times I think it's they believe that their rules should have been passed, and so they're going and they weren't, and they've adopted them anyway, right? And they're going to hold me to account for something that isn't that their peers or the broader legislative body declined in terms of rulemaking.
All right, we are just about out of time. I'm going to do a little lightning round of final thoughts. And the idea here, I want you to frame it up. Again, we're talking to CIOs and CISOs at health systems here. Your best piece of advice to make sure they're audit ready, that they have their ducks in a row. Aaron, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, keeping it brief, at a bare minimum, look at the benchmarks that you need to meet, right? If you're a healthcare organization, HIPAA literally gives you a checklist. And I know, just adhering to a checklist isn't best practice, but at a bare minimum, you ought to be doing that. And there are going to be a few. If you're a health system, if you're a healthcare provider, if you're a vendor who wants to get into health, et cetera. I mean, just look at the checklists and make sure you're taking all the boxes.
Chris, your final thought?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. On top of the checklists, visibility into all those checklists that are required and mapping them back to one another. Don't don't recreate work for yourself. If you're checking the box on one thing because you have to, it's probably a box someplace else that you need to check. Document that, point them back to one of those. So really get that roadmap for how you're dealing with compliance across the vast landscape of compliance mandates that are out there.
Excellent. Rob, we'll give you the last word.
Absolutely agree with both those approaches. And I would just say you cannot protect what you can't see, right? Inventory, asset inventory is important. We've struggled with it in corporate IT for years on the desktop side. The threats have moved to the data. So if you're after these things and you're really wanting to protect your organization and your patient populations, you got to know what you have and where it's at risk.
Perfect. All right. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. I want to thank our tremendous panel, Aaron Weismann, Rob Marti, and Chris Logan. I want to thank Censinet and Tausight for making the event possible and you for attending. But with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.